At Christmas dinner, with the tree glowing in the corner and silverware clinking under candlelight, my father looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're dead to us." The words fell like shards of glass onto the table. My mother sighed heavily, like she regretted ever inviting me. My oldest brother David shook his head, a slow motion that told me to give up, to stop fighting for a place I'd never been granted. Then Emily, my younger sister, leaned forward with a practiced smile, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "I put $5,000 into the family fund," she announced proudly. "That's what matters. Showing who truly belongs." My fingers tightened around the stem of my wine glass. My heart raced, but my voice came out steady. "Interesting," I said, raising my glass slightly. "After paying over $50,000 to save this family, don't expect a penny more." The room froze. Forks stilled midair. Even the children stopped whispering. For the first time in years, silence was mine. I should introduce myself. My name is Melissa Parker, and I'm 30 years old. For 7 long years, I was the daughter who wired money in silence, who covered medical bills, mortgage payments, and even David's repossessed SUV. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in New York while they lived under the roof I kept from foreclosure. I thought it meant I belonged. That I was loved. But as I sat there under the golden glow of the chandelier, hearing my father cut me off from blood itself, I realized I had been nothing more than a lifeline, one they were already planning to discard. The Parker family always knew how to put on a show. Tonight, the dining room in Boston looked like something from a glossy magazine spread. White linen tablecloth, sparkling crystal glasses, dishes of mashed potatoes steaming beside a golden brown turkey. Everything perfect, everything staged. Except me. My place at the far end of the table next to the kids was the quiet reminder of where I stood. The outsider seat. The one you give to someone you're obliged to include but wish you hadn't. David, my older brother, had already been praised 3 times before appetizers were cleared. Father beamed as David boasted about growth in the family business, though everyone knew the shipping contracts had collapsed. Still, Richard Parker loved his son with blind pride. Emily had her turn too, smiling sweetly as Mother gushed about her engagement party. She even added $5,000 to the family fund, Mom announced, patting Emily's hand like she was crowning a queen. Every smile at that table turned her way. When I slid a small wrapped box across to my mother, her fingers barely grazed the ribbon. She unwrapped the delicate pearl necklace without so much as a glance in my direction. "That's nice," she murmured, setting it aside, her attention already back on Emily. The sting pressed against my chest like ice. My father's gift, a set of rare woodworking tools, earned only a grunt and a distracted thank you before he leaned toward David again. I sipped my wine slowly, the bitter burn a shield against humiliation. 7 years, more than $50,000. And still, all I could buy was invisibility. It wasn't always this way. Once I believed the Parker family was unshakable. Holidays meant warmth, laughter, fire crackling in the hearth. But something shifted after I left for college. Calls for help came quietly at first, a broken furnace, a hospital bill, a late mortgage. I thought I was the good daughter by answering. I thought they would see my sacrifices as proof of love. Instead, the more I gave, the less I mattered. And here at Christmas dinner, with my father declaring me dead to them, the truth had never been clearer. The laughter circled back to Emily's upcoming wedding, to David's stories of business clients, to plans for the future that did not include me. Not once did anyone ask about my promotion in New York, about the late nights I'd poured into becoming a senior analyst. When Emily leaned forward to describe her dream venue, a mansion with marble floors and a string quartet, I could see in my mother's smile the same favoritism that had ruled this family all my life. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to keep my voice steady when I said the words that stopped the room, "Don't expect a penny more." I wanted to savor that silence, to let it settle like snow over the table. The same table I had kept alive with my money year after year. They had always expected my silence. But tonight, silence belonged to me. I scanned their faces, each reaction seared into memory. Father's stiff jaw clenched, mother pale lips pinched. David glaring like I had betrayed him. Emily, her smug confidence cracking as her fiancé shifted uncomfortably beside her. And Laura, sweet Laura, my sister-in-law, looked down at her plate, but her eyes flicked up toward me soft, almost apologetic. She knew. She had always known. The tree lights twinkled in the background, ornaments shimmering red and gold, but the warmth was gone. The candles flickered, shadows dancing across tense faces. I set my glass down gently, though my pulse hammered in my ears. For years I had played their game, pouring money into the cracks of this family, patching over every flaw with wire transfers and overtime hours. Tonight the game ended. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap, and let the silence stretch. If I was dead to them, then let it be true. From this night on, Melissa Parker would no longer be their savior, their scapegoat, their forgotten daughter. Tonight I chose to be free. And though the room brimmed with shock, though my father's words still rang in my skull, a new thought pierced through. If they had killed me in their hearts, then I could finally bury them in mine. The night was only beginning. What happened after would unravel every secret, every manipulation, and every injustice they had tried to bury beneath Christmas lights. But in that moment, with the taste of wine still on my tongue and their stunned silence hanging in the air, I knew the balance had finally shifted. For once, I wasn't the one excluded. I was the one who had excluded them. That was the moment my revenge truly began. The night after Christmas dinner, I sat alone in my New York apartment, staring at the snow drifting outside the window, the city lights blurred by frost. For the first time in years, I wasn't running numbers in my head to see how much I could spare. Instead, I let the silence wrap around me, heavy but strangely liberating. My father's voice still echoed, "You're dead to us," and my own reply haunted me in equal measure. But behind it all, memories of how I had come to this point pressed in one after another, until I could no longer hold them back. It started in 2016, the year I graduated college. I was 23, full of hope, thrilled to land my first job as an analyst. My plan was simple: move to the city, save up, maybe even take my first vacation abroad. But 2 months into my job, my father called. His voice was rough, low, but I could hear the desperation beneath it. "Melissa, the mortgage is late. If we don't catch up, the bank will come down on us." He didn't ask, not really. He said it like it was a fact I had to fix. I wired $1,800 that night, convincing myself it was temporary. But temporary turned into a pattern. Every few weeks, another call. The furnace broke in January. Mom's medical bill hadn't been fully covered. David's SUV was in repossession. Emily's tuition fees were due. Each time I transferred the money, I told myself it was the last. Each time my resolve crumbled under their voices. My mother always said, "You know family comes first, sweetheart." My father added, "We'll pay you back when things even out." But nothing evened out. By 2018, I had sent thousands. 7,000 to Emily's college before she dropped out to find herself. 9,000 to David when his SUV was taken, which he promised he'd return once his commissions improved. He never returned a dime. 15,000 over 3 years into the mortgage money I thought was holding up the roof over their heads. All while I lived in a cramped walk-up with peeling paint and second-hand furniture. My friends in the city saved for vacations in Italy. I saved their home from foreclosure. It wasn't just the money. It was the way they looked at me like I wasn't part of them. At Thanksgiving, David carved the turkey with my father's proud hand on his shoulder. Emily arranged the centerpiece, beaming under Mom's approval. And me, I brought pies and wine, the kind I'd worked overtime to afford, only to watch them dismissed as nice but unnecessary. The favoritism was blatant, cruel in its consistency. I remember the night I got promoted to senior analyst. I was exhausted but proud, finally recognized at work for the hours I'd poured in. When I told the family over dinner, David smirked. "Must be nice having all the time in the world for spreadsheets. Some of us have kids to raise." Emily chimed in with a laugh. Yeah, poor Melissa married to excel. My parents laughed too, and I forced a smile even as heat rose in my cheeks. I had just saved their house again the month before, but they treated my career like a punchline. The betrayal didn't stop there. My fiancé Ryan left me because of it. He loved me, I know he did, but he couldn't compete with the Parker emergencies. I canceled weekend trips, dinners, anniversaries, always some new crisis pulling me back. One night he stood in my apartment, watching me wire money for David's tuition. He asked softly, "Where do you fit into your own life, Melissa?" I had no answer. Months later he walked away. I cried into my pillow that night, muffling the sound so no one would hear. But the next morning, I was back at my desk, back sending money back, being the daughter who fixed everything. And then came the whispers. A year ago, during a visit, my grandmother let something slip. She thought she was speaking casually, but her words hit like a blow. Emily told me she used the family fund money for her wedding planner deposit. I thought that was supposed to be for the house repairs. I froze, heart pounding. I had wired $5,000 just weeks before, believing it was for a roof leak. I smiled and nodded at my grandmother, but inside rage burned. That wasn't the only time. Later, I found out David used the money I sent for his repossessed SUV to buy himself a luxury watch. He even bragged about it at a family barbecue, saying he'd gotten a great deal. My parents laughed, proud of him for treating himself after working so hard. Not one of them thought about the fact that it had been my hard-earned salary that paid for it. That moment, watching the sunlight glint off his wrist, I felt like the biggest fool alive. The truth was brutal. They had a secret. The so-called family fund was nothing more than a slush pile for David and Emily's dreams, with my parents covering for them. They lied to me, twisted the stories, and used my guilt as leverage. And the worst part, I let them. Because I wanted so badly to belong. By the time I added it all up, the total made my chest tighten. $20,000 for Dad's surgery after insurance wouldn't pay. $15,000 for the mortgage. $9,000 for David's car. $7,000 for Emily's tuition. $5,000 for the roof. $4,500 for the furnace. And countless smaller transfers for groceries, Christmas dinners, deposits, emergencies that never ended. More than $50,000 gone. My 20s gone. My peace of mind gone. Sitting in my apartment now, I thought of the nights I skipped dinners to work overtime. The mornings I rode the subway half asleep, the secondhand clothes, the decade-old Honda that rattled down the highway while I wired money for Emily's Uber rides and David's club memberships. I had been their invisible sponsor, their lifeline. And in return, I was the excluded daughter, the sister they joked about, the child my father looked at and said, "You're dead to us." I closed my eyes, inhaling the quiet. For years I'd told myself silence was safer. But silence had only made me their victim. At Christmas dinner, when I raised my glass and told them not to expect a penny more, I wasn't just cutting off money. I was cutting the chain that had bound me to them for nearly a decade. And though the ache in my chest was sharp, another feeling stirred beneath it: freedom. That night, as snow piled against the window panes, I whispered into the empty room, "Never again." It wasn't a vow of bitterness, it was a vow of survival. From now on, the Parker family's crises would no longer be my problem, and if they thought I was dead to them, I would prove that the silence of my absence was the most powerful revenge of all. When I pulled into the driveway of my parents' Boston home on Christmas evening, the lights glowing along the eaves looked cheerful to a stranger's eye, but to me they flickered like warning signs. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked up the path, clutching the carefully wrapped gifts in my arms. Inside, laughter spilled from the dining room, warm and loud, but it stopped the moment I opened the door. My mother glanced at the clock on the wall, her lips tight. "We've waited long enough," she said flatly, as if my arrival was more burden than blessing. No one stood to greet me, no hugs, no words of welcome. Just a chorus of eyes turning away. The dining room looked flawless. Candles flickered in silver holders, a golden brown turkey gleamed at the center of the table, and the tree in the corner glowed with strings of white lights. Yet my seat tucked at the far end beside the children reminded me that perfection was a facade. I slipped into my chair, smoothing my dress, and forced a smile as I glanced at the faces of people who never seemed to see me. My father lifted his glass, his voice booming with authority. "To family unity," he declared. Everyone echoed him, clinking glasses, their smiles warm, though not for me. My mother reached for Emily's hand, praising her for putting 5,000 into the family fund. Such generosity, she gushed. Proof of who truly belongs. Emily sat straighter, her smile smug as David chimed in about how Emily had a real heart for family. Their laughter rang across the table while my glass stayed untouched. I slid a small box across the table toward my mother, my heart tugging with hope. She untied the ribbon without even looking at me, revealing the pearl necklace inside. "That's nice," she murmured, her voice absent, before setting it beside her plate and turning back to Emily's chatter. I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat, but when my father opened his gift, a set of rare woodworking tools, I leaned forward, waiting for a flicker of pride. He muttered a distracted thank you and returned immediately to David's latest story about the family business. The favoritism was not new, but tonight it cut deeper. David's failures in the transport company were well known, yet my father nodded proudly at him as if every collapse were a triumph. Emily's upcoming wedding was treated like the royal event of the century, but my own promotion, my sacrifices, the nights I had worked until dawn to keep their world intact, they were invisible. David's voice rose above the clinking of forks. "Melissa probably buried herself in spreadsheets again this year," he said with a laugh. "Does she even know what life looks like outside of Excel?" Emily giggled, tossing her hair. "She's 30 and still single, Dad. That should worry us all." My mother sighed, her tone heavy with rehearsed concern. "Work is temporary, Melissa. Family is what lasts." Their laughter built on itself, echoing off the walls. I smiled faintly, but inside my chest ached. I thought of the countless wires I'd sent: mortgage payments, surgeries, repossessions. Was that not family? Was sacrificing my youth, my relationships, my stability, not proof of loyalty? But as they mocked me, their eyes gleaming with derision, I knew the answer. To them, I was useful, but never enough to belong. The conversation shifted to inheritance. My father let slip a comment, his words coded in pride for David and Emily. Family assets must go to those who truly belong. His gaze flicked past me as if I weren't even there. I clenched my fork so tightly the metal pressed grooves into my palm. Emily launched into a detailed description of her wedding plans, her eyes sparkling. "We're considering a mansion by the coast. Marble floors, a string quartet. It'll be unforgettable." My mother nodded approvingly while I sat frozen. I hadn't been invited. The exclusion was deliberate, a blade pressed to my skin. Laura, my sister-in-law, glanced at me from across the table. Her eyes softened, though she quickly dropped her gaze before anyone noticed. Later, as she passed me a dish, she whispered just loud enough, "They shouldn't treat you this way." But Emily caught the words, her voice sharp. "She brings it on herself." Laura flinched, falling silent, and I bit back the urge to defend her. The truth was, I had brought nothing on myself. I had given and given until there was nothing left to take, and still they wanted more. The children's laughter filled the air as they argued over pie slices, their innocence a brief balm to the tension. But when my father raised his glass again to toast another year of health, happiness, and family, the words scraped against me like sandpaper. Everyone echoed family with smiles, their voices strong. Mine stayed trapped in my throat. As dessert plates were cleared, the chatter grew louder, brighter, circling always around David's so-called accomplishments and Emily's wedding. My presence was barely acknowledged. I was a shadow at the table, my chair half hidden in candlelight. Each laugh rolled over me like waves, drowning out any attempt to speak. I let my gaze fall on the tree lights reflected in the wineglass before me. My thoughts drifted to years of working doubles, of skipping dinners, of wiring money in silence. I had bought this roof, this dinner, this illusion of perfection, and yet I sat at the edge of it, all the outsider. The room blurred for a moment, as my father leaned back laughing at one of David's jokes. My mother clasped Emily's hand, whispering about her bridal gown. I stared at them, my heart pounding, realizing with searing clarity that I was not a daughter at this table. I was an outsider who paid for their belonging. The laughter swelled again, but this time I didn't force a smile. I sat still, the candle casting only half of me in light, the other half swallowed in shadow. Inside, the storm gathered sharp and relentless. If they thought I was dead to them, then perhaps it was time I finally buried them in my own heart. And in that silent decision, as forks clattered and voices rose around me, I knew the night was far from over. My silence was ending. What came next would change everything. The moment came just after dessert, when the hum of conversation dipped and my father's chair creaked as he leaned forward. He set his wineglass down with deliberate care, his eyes sweeping the table before locking onto mine. The chatter died instantly. His jaw tightened, and in a voice colder than the December wind outside, he said, "You're dead to us." The words struck harder than any slap. My breath caught my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then my mother exhaled long and heavy, as though she regretted ever letting me through the door. David shook his head slowly. Disappointment etched into every line of his face, as if I were a child who had failed yet another exam. Emily broke the silence, her voice sweet but dripping with venom. "I've already put 5,000 into the family fund. At least I show who really matters." She smiled proudly, waiting for applause. My mother gave her hand an approving squeeze, and even my father's expression softened toward her. The hypocrisy made bile rise in my throat. I lifted my glass, the ruby wine trembling slightly as I raised it. "Interesting," I said evenly, though my pulse thundered in my ears. "After paying over 50,000 to save this family, don't expect a penny more." The silence that followed was unlike any I'd ever known. Forks hovered midair. The children stopped squirming. Even the candles seemed to flicker lower. Emily's smirk faltered, her mouth parting in shock. David's hand froze on his wineglass, his knuckles white. My father blinked once, his jaw working as if he might deny what I'd said. "You exaggerate," my mother finally snapped, her voice brittle. "Money doesn't make you family." I turned my gaze on her, calm and sharp. "Neither does betrayal." The words hung in the air, heavier than the scent of turkey and cinnamon. Laura, sitting beside David, shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes darted to mine with something like sympathy, then dropped to her lap. I knew she'd seen more than she ever said. She'd watched the wire transfers come in, heard the whispers behind closed doors. Tonight she didn't deny it. My father cleared his throat, his voice rough. "This isn't the time or place." "Oh, it's exactly the time and place," I answered, my tone rising just enough to carry. My chest burned with 7 years of silence, every unpaid promise, every dismissal. "You said I'm dead to you. Fine. But if I'm nothing to you, then stop treating me like your lifeline." Emily let out a sharp laugh, brittle and defensive. "You act like a martyr, Melissa. Nobody asked you to give so much." I met her eyes steady. "No, you just expected it." Her face flushed crimson. She pushed back her chair with a screech, but my father raised a hand, silencing her. His eyes were steel, his lips thin. "We have managed before. We'll manage again. You've made your point." For the first time, I allowed myself a bitter smile. "Will you? Because the mortgage notice last year, the surgery bill, the repossessed SUV, those weren't your victories. They were mine, paid in full." David slammed his glass onto the table, wine sloshing onto the cloth. "You think throwing numbers makes you superior? Family is about loyalty, not spreadsheets." I leaned forward, my voice low but cutting. "Loyalty is a two-way street. I gave you everything I had, and you sat here year after year mocking me for not fitting your picture-perfect family. That isn't loyalty. That's theft dressed as tradition." The room pulsed with tension. My mother dabbed at her lips with her napkin, her hands trembling. Emily muttered under her breath, but the words caught in her throat. David glared at me, but even he couldn't form a rebuttal. And then I said it, the words I'd swallowed for too long. If I'm already dead to you, then let's make it official. No more money, no more lifeline. Tonight it ends. Gasps rippled across the table. Caroline's hand jerked, knocking over her water glass. Emily's fiancé shifted awkwardly, his eyes darting between us as if he'd walked into a storm he never signed up for. The children shrank against their chairs, their laughter gone. Laura broke the silence with a whisper, her voice barely audible. She's right. We've all leaned on her too much. David snapped his head toward her, his voice sharp. Stay out of this, Laura. But the damage was done. Her words cut through the room, undeniable, spoken by someone who had nothing to gain from siding with me. My father pushed his chair back, slowly standing with effort. His face was pale, the authority in his eyes flickering. For once, he looked unsure. My mother reached for his arm, whispering Richard, but he shook her off. I set my glass down carefully, the clink echoing in the silence. You wanted me gone from this family. You've said it in 100 ways, but tonight, you said it out loud. I'll grant your wish. I'm done being your safety net. Emily's lips trembled, her voice breaking. If you walk away, you'll regret it. Weddings, birthdays, inheritance, you'll be excluded from it all. I tilted my head, meeting her gaze with a calm I didn't feel. I already was. The finality of my words fell like snow on the table, cold and irrevocable. My father's eyes dropped, his shoulders sagging, as if the weight of my truth pressed too heavy. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came. The only sound left was the crackle of the fire in the hearth, punctuating the silence I now controlled. And in that moment, for the first time in years, I wasn't the one being silenced. I was the one who silenced them. The silence that followed was suffocating, so thick it pressed against my skin. My father's words still clung to the air like smoke. You're dead to us. But now my own vow had cut deeper. No more money, no more lifeline. For the first time, the Parker family sat stunned, their plates cooling, their laughter gone. My mother was the first to break. Her napkin crumpled in her hands, tears sliding down her cheeks. Melissa, you don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. We need you. The bills, the house, it's too much. I looked at her, my pulse steady, even as my stomach twisted. No, Mom, you don't need me. You need my paycheck. Emily slammed her fist on the table, the silverware rattling. You think 50,000 makes you the savior of this family? That's nothing compared to loyalty. Her voice was sharp, but underneath it trembled something else, fear. 50,000 is everything I earned by working 60-hour weeks while you were planning parties, I said calmly. It's every vacation I never took, every new coat I couldn't buy, every relationship I lost. And you dare tell me it's nothing? David's voice cut through like a whip. Stop embarrassing us. It's Christmas dinner, for God's sake. Can't you keep your bitterness to yourself? I turned toward him slowly, the candlelight catching the tension in my jaw. I did keep it to myself, David. For 7 years. 7 years of bailing you out, of pretending your lies didn't matter. Tonight, silence is over. My father pushed back his chair, his face red. Enough. This family has always survived because we make sacrifices for each other. That's what you don't get. I laughed, a sound colder than the snow outside. Sacrifices, you mean mine. Because none of you have sacrificed a damn thing. You've mocked me for being single, for working late, for not having children yet. You lived off the very hours I bled at that office. Caroline reached for my hand across the table, her eyes desperate. We raised you. We gave you everything you needed growing up. Is this how you repay us? I pulled my hand back. What you gave me as a child, I paid back tenfold as an adult. And still you spit in my face. Emily's voice cracked as she rose to her feet. Without me, this family wouldn't even have a wedding to look forward to. I put in money too. I've contributed. I met her gaze, unflinching. 5,000 for show doesn't compare to 50,000 to survive. Don't confuse vanity with sacrifice. The words stung her. She sank back into her chair, her cheeks burning crimson. David leaned forward, his voice hard. So what, Melissa, you want us to bow down to call you the savior? No, I said quietly. I want the truth acknowledged. I want the lies to stop. Laura, silent, until now, spoke softly. She's right. Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away from the table. I've seen the transfers. I know how many times Melissa saved us. We've leaned on her too much. David's head snapped toward her. Stay out of this, Laura. She didn't flinch. No, not this time. She deserves to be heard. The room crackled with tension. My father's hand slammed onto the table. This family doesn't air dirty laundry at Christmas. This family doesn't tell the truth at all, I shot back. You talk about unity, but unity built on lies isn't family. It's a performance. My mother buried her face in her hands. Melissa, please. We can't lose the house. Your father's health, it's fragile. We need help. I stood slowly, my napkin falling to the floor. No, you don't need my help. You need to face the consequences. For once, Emily's voice rose in a shriek. You'll ruin everything. My wedding, Dad's reputation, this family. I turned to her, my expression like stone. You ruined it yourselves the moment you treated me like a wallet instead of a sister. My father's lips pressed together, his chest heaving with rage. For a moment I thought he might strike the table again. Instead he said, if you walk away, don't come back. Don't expect anything. Not inheritance, not forgiveness. I felt the sting, but I didn't look away. I never expected either. I only expected respect. And now I see that was impossible. The room shifted, energy breaking apart like a dam. Emily sobbed into her fiancé's shoulder. David stared at me with clenched fists, his face pale. Caroline rocked in her chair, whispering to herself. Only Laura sat still, her eyes steady, watching me with quiet understanding. I picked up my glass of wine, took a slow sip, and set it down carefully. You said I'm dead to you, so consider this my ghost at the table. Tonight you'll learn what life without me really feels like. Their silence was thick, suffocating. But for the first time, I didn't carry it alone. I laid it at their feet and stepped back. Melissa, my mother, whispered, her voice breaking, don't do this. Please, think of your father. Think of your brother. Think of Emily's wedding. I shook my head. Think of what you've done. Think of how easily you erased me while taking everything I had. That's what you need to live with now. The clock in the hallway chimed, a sound slicing through the quiet. It marked the end of something, the end of their hold on me. I straightened my shoulders, staring at each of them in turn. You took my silence for weakness. But tonight that silence is over. The words settled in the room like a verdict. No one dared speak. Not even the children stirred. And as I stood there, I realized the truth. For years I had been their lifeline. Now, watching the fear in their eyes, I knew the moment I walked away would be the moment they began to drown. The air in the dining room grew heavy as I stood, my chair pushed back against the hardwood floor with a long scrape. My father's hand clenched into a fist, trembling on the table. Enough of this spectacle, he growled. Sit down. I shook my head slowly, my eyes fixed on him. Not until you tell me where my money went. The question landed like a blow. Emily gasped softly, her fiancé shifted uneasily in his seat, and David stared at me, his jaw tight. My mother dabbed her lips with her napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. It went to emergencies, Richard snapped. Medical bills, the mortgage, repairs, things a daughter should want to help with. I leaned forward, my voice sharp. Lies. Every time you told me it was for something urgent, but I checked. The roof I supposedly paid for never repaired. The mortgage I covered, remortgaged again. The car I saved from repossession, David? You were flashing a new watch the next month. David slammed his hand on the table, rattling the wine glasses. Don't twist this. I needed that money, and you could spare it. Stop acting like a victim. I am the victim, I shot back, pulling an envelope from my bag. I dropped it onto the table, the papers spilling out, bank transfers, receipts, contractor estimates. Do you want me to list them? $7,000 for Emily's tuition wasted when she dropped out? $9,000 for your SUV, David, while you treated yourself to luxury. $15,000 for the mortgage, yet the bank still calls. And $20,000 for Dad's surgery, which I don't regret, but don't pretend you paid for it. I did. The papers lay between us like evidence in a trial. Emily's cheeks flushed crimson. She reached for her wineglass with a trembling hand. At least I put money into the family fund, I contributed. I turned my gaze on her. $5,000 for a wedding deposit, Emily. Don't insult me. You called it a family fund, but it was just a slush pile for your parties and David's debts. Stop it, my mother snapped, her voice sharp and shrill. She finally raised her head, her eyes flashing. This is Christmas. We don't need your accusations tearing us apart. I laughed bitterly. Accusations. Or truth. For 7 years I was your bank account. You fed me lies to keep me paying. And when I tried to belong, you shoved me to the corner of this table like a stranger. Laura, quiet until now, shifted in her chair. Her eyes flicked to the papers on the table before meeting mine. She's not wrong, she whispered. I saw the transfers. I knew she was the one keeping the mortgage alive. David snapped his head toward her. Laura, don't, but she didn't back down. Melissa deserves the truth. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. My father's lips pressed into a thin line, the skin of his face pale. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her glass. Emily's eyes darted to David, silently begging him to speak. I pressed on, my voice steady. And while we're at it, let's talk about the will. I've seen the draft. My name barely there, a token amount, while everything else goes to David and Emily. The house, the savings, even the scraps of the company. Richard stiffened, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. You're fine with me emptying my savings to keep you afloat, I said, my throat tightening. But when it comes to inheritance, suddenly I'm invisible. Good enough to pay, not good enough to belong. My mother set her glass down hard, the sound echoing. Money isn't everything, Melissa. Family is what matters. I stared at her, my chest burning. If family mattered, you wouldn't have lied. You wouldn't have used me until I had nothing left. Emily slammed her hand against the table. You always think money makes you important, she cried, her voice breaking. You buy gifts, you pay bills, and you expect us to bow down. Maybe we don't want to be bought. I stepped closer, my voice low but cutting. No, Emily. I expected honesty. I expected gratitude. But what I got was betrayal. David glared at me, his knuckles white on the edge of the table. Without Dad's approval, you're nothing. This family stands with him, not with you. I met his glare unflinching. Without me, you'd have no house, no car, no business to even pretend you run. You're standing on my back and calling it family. The room quivered with tension, the truth hanging heavy between us. The children had gone quiet, their wide eyes darting between faces they didn't understand. Laura looked down at them, her lips pressed tight, as if shielding them from the poison spilling into the air. My father's hand trembled as he grabbed the edge of the table. Enough, he said hoarsely. His face was pale, his authority cracking. We will not discuss this anymore. But the silence that followed betrayed him. For the first time he looked small, weak, ashamed. I stood tall, my voice soft but unyielding. You can bury the truth in this house, but numbers don't lie. And neither do I. Every dollar, every sacrifice is written here. You can't erase me from your history no matter how hard you try. No one spoke. My father sank slowly back into his chair, his head lowered. My mother stared at the tablecloth, her lips trembling. Emily bit her lip until it bled. David clenched his jaw, his fury boiling but powerless. The crackle of the fireplace filled the silence, the only sound in the suffocating room. And in that stillness, for the first time in my life, they had nothing to throw back at me. The truth was mine, and now they had to live with it. The only sound in the room was the pop of a log splitting in the fireplace. My papers lay scattered across the table, the black ink glaring up at them like evidence in a courtroom. No one moved. Then, slowly, my father leaned back, his face blotchy red, his voice a low growl. You've twisted everything. That money was for emergencies. We did what we had to. My mother clutched at her pearls, her eyes wet. Melissa, you've misunderstood. Every choice we made was to keep this family's reputation intact. Don't make this uglier than it already is. David shoved his chair back a few inches, pointing a finger at me as if I were a misbehaving child. You think because you've got your fancy New York job and your bank account, you're better than us. You've always been dramatic, Melissa. Always. I stood taller, the weight of years pressing down but not breaking me. Dramatic? What's dramatic about paying off your repossession? Noticed David Orr. Wiring tuition for Emily when she dropped out the next semester. What's dramatic about saving the house from foreclosure while you played the Golden Sun? Don't you dare talk to me like that, David snapped. I'm still your brother. Family is family. I laughed bitter and sharp. Family? You don't even know the meaning of the word. Emily finally spoke, her voice brittle. You're the reason we fight. If you didn't throw numbers in our faces, this would be a happy Christmas. You're ruining everything. I turned my gaze on her, calm and cold. No, Emily. I didn't ruin anything. I simply stopped pretending. My mother's tears spilled, falling onto her napkin. We raised you, Melissa. We gave you everything you needed as a child. And now you stand here acting like we owe you. We don't. You owe us. You owe this family loyalty. The manipulation was as clear as the candlelight. I folded my arms. Loyalty isn't debt. And you don't get to erase what I've given by crying into your wine glass. My father slammed his palm against the table, rattling the crystal. Without family, you are nothing. Don't forget who gave you this life. I met his glare. And don't forget who kept you alive when the hospital demanded $20,000 you didn't have. He froze, the color draining from his face. The silence returned, but it was fractured, now broken by the tremor of truth hanging in the air. My mother tried again, her voice trembling. If you walk away, we'll lose the house. Your father's health. We can't do this without you. Please, Melissa. Please, I repeated softly. Funny. That word never came when you mocked me for being single, or when you called me selfish for focusing on work. Now, suddenly, I'm the center of this family's universe. Emily's chair screeched as she stood, her eyes wild. You'll ruin my wedding. Do you even understand what this means for me? The caterer, the venue, all of it depends on the family fund. I tilted my head. So my sacrifice was just your wedding fund. That's what I've been working for all these years. David's jaw tightened. Stop twisting it. Without Dad's approval, you're nothing. You've always lived in your own little world. No, I said, my voice steady. I lived in your world. I lived under your needs, your debts, your failures. And now, for the first time, I'm choosing my own. Laura cleared her throat softly. All eyes turned to her as she shifted in her seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She's right, she whispered, her voice shaking but firm. We've all leaned on Melissa too much. You've leaned on her too much. David's head snapped toward her. Laura, don't start. But she didn't stop. I've watched her wire money late at night. I've seen the strain in her eyes while we sat here pretending everything was fine. She has carried all of us, and none of us have carried her. The words cut through the room like glass. My father's eyes dropped. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. Emily sank back into her chair, her hands covering her face. David clenched his jaw, but even he couldn't argue. I drew a breath, feeling the heat in my chest cool into steel. You wanted me dead to you. Remember that those were your words. From tonight on, consider it done. I am no longer your bank. I am no longer your scapegoat. I am your ghost. The weight of my words sank into them, heavy and undeniable. My mother whispered through her tears, Melissa, don't say that. Don't leave us like this. I looked at her, my heart both heavy and light. I'm not leaving you. You already left me years ago. You left me when you decided I wasn't enough unless I was paying your bills. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, marking each second of silence that followed. I pushed my chair in the sound final. You wanted me dead to you, so let it be true. Tonight the silence is mine. Their faces blurred in the candlelight, my father's fury, my mother's grief, David's rage, Emily's panic. And Laura's quiet, steady gaze, the only one that didn't look away. I turned toward the door, the storm I carried finally breaking into calm resolve. Behind me, my father's voice cracked. If you leave now, don't expect anything from us. Not the house, not the inheritance, not a place at this table ever again. I stopped at the threshold, the cold air from outside brushing my face. Slowly, I turned back. I never expected anything. That's the difference between you and me. I gave everything I had because I loved you, and you gave nothing but conditions. Tonight, those conditions die. The room went silent again, their eyes wide, their mouths shut. And for the first time I knew they were listening, not because they wanted to, but because I'd left them no choice. The scrape of my chair against the floor echoed like thunder as I pushed back and stood. My hands no longer shook. I gathered my purse from the side of the chair, slung it over my shoulder, and let the silence swallow the room whole. My father's face was scarlet veins bulging at his temple. My mother's hands clutched the pearls at her neck, as though they might hold her together. Emily's eyes were wide, glassy with panic, and David looked ready to leap across the table. But no one moved. "This is the last Christmas you'll ever use me," I said, my voice carrying steady and low. Richard's chair screeched as he shoved it back. "Sit down," he barked, his voice cracking with rage. "We're not finished." I shook my head. "Oh, we're finished. You said I was dead to you, Dad. Tonight I'll make it true." Emily's voice rose into a shrill cry. "Without you, how am I supposed to pay for my wedding? The deposits, the venue, they'll all be lost." She sounded less like a bride-to-be and more like a child whose toys had been taken. David stepped forward, blocking the doorway. His jaw was clenched, his fist tight. "Don't walk out. You can't just abandon us." Laura touched his sleeve, her voice urgent but calm. "David, let her go. She doesn't owe us this." He pulled his arm away, but the hesitation was enough. I reached into my purse and pulled out a plain white envelope. My fingers didn't tremble this time as I tossed it onto the table. It landed beside the cranberry sauce with a soft thud. "That covers my share of Christmas dinner," I said flatly. Nothing more. My mother's eyes darted to the envelope, her face pale. "Melissa, please, think of your father. Think of the children. Think of us." I leaned closer, meeting her eyes across the length of the table. "I am. And for once, I'm thinking of what example you're setting. Teach Sophie and Ethan that betrayal has consequences. Because this is mine." A sob escaped Emily's throat. She covered her face with her hands, muffling the sound. My father gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles white. "You're selfish." "After all we've given you," I cut him off with a laugh, cold and sharp. "After all you've given me, Dad, I spent my 20s living in a shoebox apartment, driving a car held together with duct tape so I could wire you thousands at a time. I gave you my youth, my savings, my peace of mind, and you gave me ridicule." I picked up my coat from the chair, sliding one arm in. My movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Tonight I'm giving you the gift of reality. You'll have to face it without me." The door behind me loomed like an escape, but I paused, glancing back one last time at the family I had nearly destroyed myself to keep together. Emily's fiancé sat stiffly in his chair, avoiding my eyes, his lips pressed tight, as though he'd just seen behind the curtain for the first time. David's face was pale, his bravado cracking. My mother's shoulders shook as silent tears fell. And my father, proud, unyielding Richard Parker, looked suddenly smaller, his authority collapsing with every breath. I stepped into the foyer, the chill from the front door seeping through the cracks. My hand touched the doorknob, cold and firm under my fingers. "Melissa," my father roared, "if you leave now, don't ever come back." I turned the knob slowly, looking over my shoulder with a calm I never thought I'd feel. "You already buried me tonight. Now you'll get to live with it." The door opened to the howl of the winter wind. Snow swept across the porch, swirling under the light. I stepped out, my boots crunching against the frozen ground, the night swallowing me whole. Behind me, voices rose in chaos. Emily crying, David shouting, my mother pleading, my father barking orders. But the door shut with a heavy thud, cutting them off. Out on the street, Boston glittered with Christmas lights, every window warm, with scenes of families gathered, laughter spilling into the night. My breath rose in white clouds, but inside I felt a strange heat, a fire that had been starved too long and now burned steady. For 7 years I had played the role of savior. For 7 years I believed silence was safer than confrontation. Tonight silence was my weapon. Tonight walking away was the only revenge I needed. I drove back to New York with the snow drifting across the highway. The radio hummed softly, Christmas carols, floating like ghosts in the car. But I wasn't haunted anymore. The chains I had carried had fallen away in the echo of my father's words and the slam of the door behind me. When I pulled into the lot behind my apartment, the city was still alive with light. I killed the engine, sat for a moment in the quiet, and whispered to myself, "This time the silence belongs to me." In that whisper, I felt the first taste of freedom. And though I knew the Parker family's world was already cracking without me, I also knew this was only the beginning of their unraveling. The true payback was yet to come. Morning light spilled through the blinds of my New York apartment, painting the walls in muted gold. For the first time in years, I didn't wake to a barrage of messages about bills, overdue payments, or family emergencies. The only sound was the radiator's steady hiss, the city's hum outside, and the quiet beat of my own heart. I sat at the edge of my bed, clutching a steaming mug of coffee, and realized how foreign peace felt. My phone buzzed once, then again, then over and over. By noon, the screen was lit with voicemails. I let them play on speaker as I tidied my apartment, each one proof that walking away had left them scrambling. David's voice came first, urgent and breathless. "Melissa, you can't just leave us hanging. The bank is threatening to take the SUV again. If I don't make the payment this week, it's gone. You know how much I need that car for work. Just cover this one last time. I'll pay you back, I swear." I deleted the message with a tap before it could finish. Emily's message came next, her tone high-pitched, teetering on the edge of hysteria. The caterer canceled. They said the deposit wasn't paid in full, and now the florist is backing out too. Do you understand what this means for me? My wedding is ruined unless you step in. Please, Melissa, please. Her sobs filled the line before the voicemail cut off. The third was softer, older, my father. "Sweetheart, the mortgage is overdue again. We're 2 months behind. Your mother and we just don't have it this time. Please don't let us lose the house. Not now, not after everything." The silence after his words was heavier than the plea itself. But even his voice no longer held the same grip on me. I placed the phone face down on the counter and let the quiet return. Each voicemail was a thread they tried to pull, threads I had untangled the night I walked out. They weren't mine to carry anymore. News of their unraveling reached me in other ways, too. A colleague mentioned hearing gossip about the Parker Transport Company. Contracts had collapsed after David botched negotiations, and several employees quit when paychecks bounced. The company, once my father's pride, was circling the drain. Without my silent injections of cash, the family business was finally showing its true state, hollow and crumbling. I imagined my father sitting in his office, staring at numbers that wouldn't add up no matter how he twisted them. For years, he'd leaned on my secret transfers to bridge the gap. Now the bridge was gone. Emily's unraveling was more public. Photos vanished from her social media, the smiling engagement, shots the bridal, fittings the countdowns to her big day. In their place were cryptic posts, thinly veiled cries for attention. A mutual friend sent me a message. Her fiancé called it off. Said he couldn't marry someone who relied on her sister's paycheck to fund the entire wedding. I stared at the screen, a pang of pity twisting briefly before fading into something colder. Emily had paraded $5,000 into the family fund like it made her the crown jewel. Now, without me, the crown had turned to dust. The phone buzzed again, another voicemail. This time from my mother. Her voice was sharp, brittle. "You've made your point, but think of your family name. People are talking. Do you want us humiliated? Do you want the Parkers to be remembered as beggars? I nearly laughed at the irony. They had already been beggars, only I was the one filling their cups. But the gossip spread faster than she feared. Relatives called to ask what had happened. A cousin confided that my parents were talking about rewriting the will, cutting me out entirely. They say you turned your back on them, she said hesitantly. But people also know you were the one holding everything together. The will, that final weapon, even erased from their future, I no longer cared. What good was an inheritance when it came chained to humiliation and betrayal? Weeks passed and the storm inside me began to ease while theirs raged on. I walked home from work through snow-lined streets, breathing in the cold air with a freedom I hadn't felt since I was 23. My apartment, once too quiet, now felt like sanctuary. I cooked for myself, spent evenings reading by the window, and for the first time saved money for me. Meanwhile, the Parker house told a different story. Word trickled back through neighbors and relatives the furnace had gone out again, patched with space heaters. The roof leaked in heavy snow, forcing them to place pots across the dining room floor. The mortgage company sent foreclosure warnings. With no Melissa to call, they faced the world raw and unshielded. David's SUV finally vanished from the driveway, repossessed a second time. Emily moved back home. Her boxes piled in the foyer, her wedding gown hidden in the closet like a ghost. My father, once booming with pride, shuffled through consulting work above a print shop combing construction reports for a fraction of what he once made. My mother avoided neighbors, her face drawn tight, her eyes red from tears. Karma had a strange way of working. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady, inevitable, like snow covering everything until the shape beneath couldn't be hidden anymore. One night my phone lit up again, not with begging, but with anger. David's voice roared through the speaker. "Do you feel good, Melissa? Watching us struggle? You think this is revenge? You're pathetic. You're no sister of mine." I let the message play out, then deleted it without a word. Revenge didn't require my participation. Their own choices had built this collapse. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall, each flake catching the glow of the streetlight. For years, I'd been the invisible scaffolding that held up the Parker family. Now, as their house cracked and their stories unraveled, I was free to stand alone, visible at last, even if only to myself. And as the city slept under a blanket of white, I whispered into the glass. Every missed call is proof the chains are broken. The phone buzzed again on the table, their desperation spilling over once more. But I didn't pick it up. This silence was mine, and I wasn't giving it back. The first email arrived on a gray Monday morning subject line, sharp enough to slice through my calm. "Did you really abandon your parents?" It was from a colleague at work, his tone polite but wary. My stomach clenched. I hadn't said a word about my family to anyone in New York, but somehow the whispers had traveled faster than I could imagine. I opened my phone, scrolling through notifications, and saw the source. David had posted on Facebook, his words dripping with righteousness. "Some people think money makes them family. Truth is loyalty does. Shame when your own sister doesn't understand that." Dozens of likes, comments of sympathy from his friends, neighbors, chiming in with pity. Emily wasn't far behind. On Instagram, she posted a photo of herself crying in a messy bedroom, captioned, "When your own blood decides you're not worth saving." She never said my name, but she didn't need to. Everyone in our circle knew who she meant. By Tuesday, my mother's voice was on relatives' lips, telling them I had abandoned my father in the hospital and humiliated the family. My father, Richard, doubled down with his own narrative to neighbors. Melissa betrayed us for her career in New York. The words spun through the air, a net of poison designed to trap me. At work, I smiled through questions I didn't want to answer. "Is everything okay at home? I heard you're not close with your family." Behind the polite curiosity, I sensed judgment. I sipped my coffee and forced steady replies. "We're just going through things." But inside, the betrayal carved deeper than any bill I'd ever paid. That night, I sat in my apartment with the lights off, listening to their voices replay in my head. For years, I had been the one covering their chaos, the quiet savior. Now I was the villain in their story. The injustice stung, but more than that, it enraged me. They hadn't just taken my money, they were trying to steal my truth. The phone rang. Laura's name lit up the screen. I answered quickly, half afraid, half hopeful. Her voice was low, urgent. "Melissa, you need to know what's happening. They're rewriting everything, to make it sound like you never gave a dime. They're saying you turned your back because you wanted to humiliate them." I closed my eyes, my chest tight. "Of course they are." "There's more," she whispered. "Richard, he used part of your transfers for a personal investment, a construction scheme with an old partner. It failed. He covered it by telling everyone it was for your dad's medical bills." The words landed heavy, but not with surprise, more like confirmation of a suspicion I'd buried. "So even the surgery wasn't what it seemed," I said softly. "No, part of it was real, but the rest, it disappeared. And now they're acting like you turned against them out of pride. It's not true, and you know it." "I've always known it," I said. My voice cracked, but not from weakness. It cracked like ice, finally breaking under the weight of too many winters. The days that followed proved Laura right. My cousin called hesitantly, asking if it was true that I refused to help when the mortgage slipped. Another relative emailed saying, "My parents were so heartbroken that I chose money over family." The smear campaign was in full swing, but as their voices grew louder, their lives began to crumble faster. The transport company bled contracts until only scraps remained. David was spotted riding the bus after his SUV was repossessed again. Emily's wedding was not only canceled, her fiancé moved out, citing her family's dependence on me as a deal breaker. My mother's proud face at church turned into whispers behind her back. My father's shoulders sagged with shame as people began asking why their daughter, the one who supposedly abandoned them, was the only one thriving. It was karma at work, steady and merciless. Still, their words stung. Betrayal layered on betrayal. I had paid the bills, wired the funds, kept the lights on. Now they twisted the story to erase me entirely. They wanted me dead in more ways than one, erased from memory, erased from truth. On a Thursday night, another voicemail came. My father's voice, raw with anger. "Do you feel good, Melissa? Do you enjoy watching us suffer? You've embarrassed us publicly. You're no daughter of mine." I pressed play again and again, listening not for his words, but for the cracks in his voice. The man who once stood unshakable was crumbling, and still he couldn't admit it. I poured a glass of wine and stared out at the city lights. The skyline shimmered, indifferent to my pain, and I realized something: revenge didn't always require fire or fury. Sometimes it required nothing at all, just letting them choke on the lies they spun until the truth weighed too heavy to ignore. My phone buzzed with another message, this time from Laura. "Don't let them win. They can rewrite their story, but not yours. One day people will see who really carried them." I typed back, my fingers steady. "They already are." Slowly, one missed payment at a time. And as the snow fell outside, blanketing the city in silence, I let myself smile. My family could twist the narrative all they wanted, but their crumbling house, their failed business, Emily's broken engagement, those were truths they couldn't erase. The smear campaign might paint me as a traitor, but in the quiet of my apartment, I knew better. I wasn't the villain. I was the ghost they created, one who no longer carried their sins. And ghosts don't beg for forgiveness. They haunt. The invitation came folded neatly in an envelope stamped with a gold seal. At first I thought it was another wedding announcement, another cruel reminder of what I had been excluded from. But when I tore it open, I saw my own name printed boldly: Melissa Parker, guest speaker, National Conference on Financial Literacy, New York City. I sat at my kitchen table, the words blurring as tears pricked my eyes. For years I had been invisible at my own family's table. Now strangers wanted to hear my story, not because they pitied me, but because they believed it mattered. That night I pulled out a notebook scrawling memories that still burn. The wire transfers the bills the way my father looked at me on Christmas and said, "You're dead to us." Each line felt like reopening a wound, but also like cleaning it for the first time. I thought I was buying love, I wrote, but I was only renting silence. The more I wrote, the steadier my hand became. The days leading up to the conference were restless. At the office, colleagues treated me with a new respect since the news of my promotion had spread. Yet I could still feel the sting of gossip, the whispers seated by my family. And then came another blow, an email forwarded by a cousin containing a draft of my parents' will. My name was there, buried at the bottom. A token amount, not even enough to cover the money I had given. The rest left to David and Emily. I stared at the screen, the betrayal searing into me. It should have gutted me. Instead, it set me free. There was nothing left to lose. On the morning of the conference, I stood backstage, my hands gripping the edges of the podium. My heart hammered so loudly, I thought the microphone might pick it up. Rows of faces stretched out before me, executives in sharp suits, young graduates scribbling notes, financial advisors waiting for insight. I took a deep breath, and then I began. "I want to tell you a story," I said, my voice echoing across the ballroom. "Not about numbers or markets, but about family. About what happens when love is twisted into obligation, when boundaries are erased by guilt." The words flowed easier than I expected. I spoke of my 20s spent wiring money to cover medical bills, mortgages, repossessed cars. Of watching siblings praised for crumbs while my sacrifices disappeared into silence. Of the Christmas night when my father told me I was dead to him. "I used to believe numbers didn't lie," I said, glancing at the rows of faces leaning forward. "But affection can. Loyalty can." I gave over $50,000 to a family who still looked me in the eye and said I didn't belong. Tonight I stand here because I finally said enough. And that single word, enough, was the start of reclaiming my life. The ballroom was silent when I finished, the kind of silence I had once feared. But then it broke, not with ridicule, not with dismissal, but with applause. A standing ovation rose like a wave, faces shining with empathy. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. Heat rushed into my chest, not shame, but recognition. The kind of recognition I had begged for at home and never received. Reporters asked for quotes afterward, trade publications scribbled notes, and by the end of the week my name was printed in articles. Analyst speaks out, setting boundaries between family and finance. Colleagues shook my hand, managers congratulated me, and strangers emailed to thank me for my courage. While my voice grew louder in New York, silence deepened in Boston. The Parker family's cracks widened. David had to sell the SUV he clung to like a trophy. The transport company bled, dry contracts falling through until my father sat hunched over a desk in a rented office above a print shop sorting paperwork for pennies. Emily's wedding gown remained stuffed in a closet, her engagement broken, and her pride shattered. My mother, once the queen of her church circle, now avoided Sunday services, too ashamed to face the whispers. One night my phone buzzed. I answered, expecting another unknown number, but it was Richard. His voice rasped, heavy with exhaustion. "You embarrassed us," he said, the words cracking. "Publicly. After everything we gave you." I swallowed, staring out at the skyline glittering beyond my window. "No, Dad. You embarrassed yourselves when you turned me into a bank instead of a daughter." The silence on his end lasted so long I thought he'd hung up, but then came a sigh, weak, defeated. He didn't argue. He simply ended the call. I placed the phone down, my hands steady. For years his voice had controlled me, wrapped me in guilt. Tonight it was powerless. Standing at the hotel window in New York later that week, I looked out over the endless city lights, my reflection staring back at me. Not the overlooked daughter, not the scapegoat. A woman who had taken her pain and turned it into power. My family might try to erase me from wills, from stories, from their table, but they could never erase the truth. I had carried them, and now, finally, I was carrying myself. And as the snow began to fall against the glass, I whispered to my reflection, "Revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just speaks the truth." Snowflakes swirled gently across the windshield as I pulled into the driveway of the house I had once called home. It was Christmas Eve again, 1 year later, and the Parker home looked smaller than I remembered. The lights strung across the eaves blinked in uneven patterns, a wreath sagged on the front door, and the glow inside was dimmer than in years past. For a long moment, I sat in the car, my breath fogging the glass, debating whether to step out. Beside me, David, not my brother, but the man who had quietly walked into my life months after the storm reached across and squeezed my hand. His warmth grounded me. "You don't have to go in if you're not ready," he said softly. "I am," I whispered, surprising myself. "This time it's on my terms." The crunch of snow under our boots echoed in the still night as we approached the door. It swung open before I could knock. My mother stood there smaller than I had ever seen her, her hands twisting in front of her. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Melissa," she breathed, her voice breaking, "I'm so glad you came." Behind her, my father hovered shoulders, hunched, his once booming presence shrunken. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in my life, they weren't filled with pride or rage. They were filled with something closer to relief. Inside the house smelled faintly of roasted turkey and cinnamon, but it was quieter than any holiday I remembered. The table was set, but there were fewer chairs spaced evenly. No one shoved into the corner this time. Emily sat at the far side, her makeup smudged as if she'd been crying. She didn't meet my eyes at first. David, my brother, was there, too thinner, worn, his bravado long gone. Laura stood beside him, steady as ever, and the children Sophie and Ethan lit up when they saw me. Aunt Melissa Sophie squealed, running forward to wrap her arms around me. Ethan followed, pressing a handmade card into my hands, the snowman on the cover drawn with crooked lines. My throat tightened as I knelt to hug them. "I missed you both so much," I whispered, brushing Sophie's hair back. The room was heavy with unspoken words, but Michael, my older brother, who once blocked the door to keep me from leaving, cleared his throat. "We owe you an apology," he said quietly, his voice stripped of its old arrogance. "You were right to walk away. We had to learn the hard way." Laura's hand touched his arm gently. "It saved us," she added, "even if it didn't feel like it at the time." Emily's chair scraped softly as she stood, her eyes red. "I thought 5,000 made me important. But you were the one who saved us for years. I didn't want to see it. I couldn't." Her voice cracked and she sank back down. I looked around the table, the faces once so dismissive now softened by humility, by consequence. "I didn't want revenge," I said slowly. "I wanted respect, but karma gave us all what we needed to learn." My father's lips parted, his voice hoarse. "We failed you, Melissa. We leaned on you, used you, resented you for being strong where we were weak. I don't expect forgiveness tonight, but I hope this can be a start." I drew a breath, my chest rising and falling with the weight of years. "If we move forward, it's as equals. I'm not your bank. I'm not your scapegoat. I'm your daughter, your sister. Nothing more, nothing less." Silence hung, but it was different this time. Not sharp, not hostile, but contemplative. My mother nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. My father lowered his head, ashamed but acknowledging. David exhaled, shoulders sagging, and Emily pressed her palms together like she was holding herself steady. Sophie tugged on my sleeve. "Does this mean you'll come back every Christmas?" she asked, her innocent eyes wide. I knelt again, smiling through the sting in my eyes. "It means if I come back, it will be because I want to, not because anyone expects me to." The dinner that followed was unlike any Parker holiday I remembered. The turkey was carved without fanfare, David poured the wine, Emily passed the bread, and Laura led the children in singing carols. No one boasted, no one mocked. For once the table felt level. When gifts were exchanged, they were modest but thoughtful. Michael handed me a scarf. Sophie had picked herself its stitches, uneven, but full of love. Daniel gave me a journal with a note tucked inside for your story because it deserves to be written. My parents presented me with a framed photo of the family from years ago, before the bitterness, before the lies. A quiet gesture of recognition that I had always been there, even if they hadn't seen me. Later in the kitchen, my mother pulled me aside. Her voice was trembling. Last year I said something unforgivable. I told you you weren't part of this family. That was a lie. The truth is, you were the heart of this family. I was too blind to admit it. I looked at her, the years of pain still etched in my chest. Words cut deep, Mom. But actions matter more. If you mean it, show it. That's all I ask. She nodded, her tears falling freely now. I will. As the night wound down, the fire crackled in the living room. The children played on the rug, their laughter light and free. For the first time, I felt the warmth of belonging, without the weight of obligation pressing against my chest. When I stood to leave David, my partner slipped his arm around my waist. I turned to the room one last time. Tonight matters, I said softly, because it shows that sometimes the harshest words we speak are the ones that save us. They don't just save us from others, they save the family too. I stepped into the night, the snow drifting under the porch light, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. If you've ever been forced to set boundaries with the people you love, if you've ever carried the weight of a family that never saw your worth, I hope my story shows you this revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it's reclaiming your place with dignity. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if my story touched something in your own. And if you want to hear more about family fairness, betrayal, and the strength it takes to protect yourself, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Your voice matters here, and I'd love for you to be part of this community. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, your value isn't in what you give away, it's in who you are.